Hey everyone, just gonna get Shala in, hopefully. Hey,
Hi,
Shala.
how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Awesome.
Thank
Okay.
you for having me.
Oh, well, thank you for saying yes. This is
Sure, of
so
course.
honored by everyone saying yes to chat. I hope the weather is nicer there than it is here today.
Yeah, it's really sunny and warm.
It's been raining and icy today, so it's not a great winter day here.
Mm. Well, you have power?
Yes, fortunately, power. Yeah,
Yeah, I know
so
so many people have lost their power, so it's good that you have that.
yes, we still have power. Um, it's just just icky today. But let's see, we're going to let some more people come on in.
I've been enjoying your guests. You had some really great guests that you've invited, so it's
Oh,
been going wonderful.
yes, and you're just topping it off. So
Oh, thank you.
you're welcome. I cannot wait to dive in today to get more into toxins and all of that because I cannot wait to hear what you have to say about it. And
Yeah, I like to talk about it, but I mean, it can be a downer topic, but the positive is that you can do things about it. So that's what we want to
right.
learn.
Yes, I know it can get really, really overwhelming.
Hmm.
Which I know that when I started my journey with everything and over 8 years ago and was trying to
Hmm.
figure out what the heck was going on and like the whole toxic overload and everything, I was
Hmm.
like, wow, wow. And so
Yeah, it's definitely a lot.
it is. It is a lot. So yeah, so I can't wait to hear more about what you have to say. But so let's see here. Okay. So I think I'm going to get started so we can dive into this. And I'm just going to give an intro for you and myself, and then we'll get going.
Perfect. Sounds good.
So, hey everyone. So this I'm going to introduce Shala. So in on the East Coast, this would be Salem.
Yes, it's Salem.
Okay.
Perfect. Perfect pronunciation.
So, Shala is an integrative gynecologist and fertility specialist with over a decade of experience. She currently practices in Southern California and where she helps patients to optimize their fertility through modern conventional treatments combined with integrative medicine practices. Her personal challenges with her own health and fertility led her to look beyond conventional medicine and pursue training in integrative medicine. So I'm super excited to talk to Shala because I just can't wait to get get into her mind and understand more about what's going on. So for
Thank
those who
you.
don't know me, I'm Dr. Ryan Bailey. I am a women's health physical therapist, and I help women from preconception to postpartum really consciously prepare their body physically for conception, for pregnancy, for birth, and for the recovery period of postpartum. So we are going to be talking about toxins today, which, if you were here in the very beginning of the conversation, can be kind of a heavy topic to discuss. And there can be um, a lot of questions around really what to do and what can we do and so I hope that we can uncover some of those and maybe calm some nerves around this topic a little bit today.
Yes,
So
definitely.
yeah, so I'm gonna pass it over to Shala, and I want her just to kind of open it up to us about what toxins, what should we consider as toxins, and kind of how do those play a role in just our health to start with?
Okay. Well, thank you, Ryan. The work you do is so important. And I really think it's important for the medical community to put more value into, especially preconception, doing pelvic therapy. It's very rare, honestly, to even see doctors putting much weight postpartum, which is so important. I was just talking to somebody about that the other day, that I really like to work with physical therapists because it's so beneficial.
Yeah, I feel like really working as a team is the way to go because we all have our specialties. We all look at the body differently, and that makes then the people we are working with more holistically and more whole body healed, which is really
I could
want.
totally agree with that. I think the team approach is the best way to go. The problem is really getting that in traditional care. It doesn't exist. And unfortunately, it can be limiting for a lot of patients because there are a lot of out of pocket costs if you want to work with all these different providers and nutritionists and acupuncturists and pelvic floor therapists. So there's a lot of, hopefully one day we'll get there. Well, that will be considered more traditional, just
Right.
regular medicine, not
Exactly.
not alternative or integrative or any of that, just regular medicine.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot more preventative stuff.
Yeah,
So
totally. So,
yeah.
environmental toxins, I really got interested in investigating it probably similar time to you, about 8 years ago, when I was interested in how my fertility and what the impact of that might be. And I was, to be honest, quite shocked that I didn't know about so many of these things. I'd heard about it, but I didn't know that there really was a full body of evidence to support that certain toxins could impact fertility.
Yeah.
It's becoming a little bit more mainstream now to talk about. However, it's still not something that regular conventional doctors will speak about on a regular basis, unfortunately. Some do, and some are interested in. And so I think definitely if you're on Instagram a lot, you'll see it. But when you go out, as if I see regular patients, I have a lot of patients that still have no idea about toxins. So there's still a lot of work to be done to really educate women and men about the potential impacts of fertility. Now, environmental toxins, there's a lot of possibilities. We have about 84,000 chemicals that are in our environment approximately, and it's ever growing. And we have seen that as chemicals have increased over decades, since the 1940s or so, really we saw that boom after World War II. Then we saw that there have been increases in diseases. We see that as plastic production increased, we saw decreases in male sperm, and we saw increases in diabetes, increase in cancer. Now, just because we saw that increase doesn't mean that that is the cause. So correlation doesn't equal cause, but there's a number of studies to support. And one of the things that's super interesting is that since the 1970s, we've seen this concentration of sperm decrease by about 50%. And so what we don't know is what is the impact of that. So do you need to have, double the amount of sperm in order to have pregnancy? Are we seeing really the pregnancy rates decline? We don't know. Is it going to drop by 50% in another 50 years, another 50%? I mean, I can tell you, since I started working 10 years ago, World Health Organization changed normal sperm count from 20 million to 15 million.
Okay.
And so just in that time period. Now, whether that's maybe they thought, well, it's not important, you don't need to have this high of a sperm count, but it is kind of interesting. And I know there's actually a book coming out by Dr. Swain that's going to go into this. I'm super excited. It's coming out next week, and I can send you that information and you could share it with your audience. Just really diving more into the topic of the drop in male sperm. So we did see that. What is the reason for that? Well, they did a lot of studies and have really come down to it couldn't just happen with genes that quickly.
Right.
So we really have thought it's lifestyle. Is it chemicals? Is it lifestyle and the increased risk of obesity? I mean, increased rates of obesity that we've seen over the years. Is that the reason? We don't know exactly yet. And like I said, we don't know the clinical relevance of this drop in male sperm counts. So there are a lot of chemicals. We're all around chemicals, right? One of the things I think is super important, and we touched on earlier, is not getting overwhelmed, because this topic feels so heavy. It feels so overwhelming. Everything in our homes, in our environments, has potential to have chemicals. That is just the bottom line. So we have to look at what are the things that we can control. When you're working with patients that are trying to get pregnant, they already have a lot on their plate and they don't need to be overloaded more, but we want to think about what are the things that you can change. And I usually focus on my top 3 things. So things like BPA, phthalates, or pesticides. Those are kind of the top 3. There are a lot of other ones that we can go into, but that's kind of the top 3. And endocrine disruptors, or things like, for example, BPA, it is almost like a mimic of estrogen.
Right.
And we know that actually BPA, or bisphenol A, initially in the 1930s, it was hopefully going to be a pharmaceutical drug. The plan for it was it to be a pharmaceutical estrogen. So they wanted to use it in the 30s as an estrogen. They found a better one, or so they thought, called DES, or diethylstilbestrol, which eventually was pulled off the market in the 70s. They used it for supporting women to reduce miscarriage rates. It was pulled off the market because it was causing increased risk of vaginal cancers, increased malformations in the uterus of the women who had exposure, their fetus had exposure. So we saw, and then we are still noticing that there are effects on the grandchildren and potentially the great grandchildren. So the question is, does BPA have the same possibility? Because remember, we thought about BPA being that estrogen. Well, there's animal studies that actually look at BPA. When they expose mice to BPA, they looked and found exposure went all the way across 4 generations to cause abnormalities. So changes in certain things that have to do with reproduction in mice. It's harder to get that kind of study for us because mice obviously reproduce quickly and we can follow generations very quickly. But in humans, it takes a long time. The other thing, the other problem when we talk about toxins is you cannot study that in a vacuum, which is usually what happens with mice, right? We study it just that. We isolate the mice and we study, but what is the impact of all the other things along with BPA? So that is the other problem. We always say, well, there's not that much of an effect, but there are other things going on at the same time. So BPA, and you can jump in anytime. I don't want to.
No, go, and this is.
So BPA is basically, we think of it like a xenoestrogen, which means it's like it could function as an estrogen.
Right.
And it can interfere with your own hormones. We know that it's something that there's lots of studies that have shown that it can impact egg number. So the studies usually come from IVF because you can't get this study in somebody just trying on their own, right? So when you do a study like IVF, you have the ability to take eggs out and then look at them, see how many of them become embryos, see how the pregnancy rates look.
Right.
So when they looked at women that had the highest levels of BPA, they saw that they had reduced levels of estrogen, first off. Secondly, they saw a reduction in the number of eggs. They saw reduced number that went on to become embryos and reduced implantation rates. So it really went across all of these stages. We know that it can be toxic to the eggs and it can impact the ability of the egg to divide to become normal, because that's one of the things that happens when eggs, women are born with all the eggs you're going to have. They're stuck in this state before they have to be fertilized where they need to divide their genetic material. If you have the damage to that, then you end up with an egg that's chromosomally abnormal. So that's one of the reasons that we see that. So that with BPA. The other thing that I thought, I want women to know is that there's a lot of studies that say really it's the women that have the highest levels of BPA that had the most effect. So Does that mean, hey, you have a water bottle here and there that you're going to have these problems with your fertility? Probably not. But when we talk about how you get exposure, most of the exposure from BPA comes from food and drink. Okay. There are just really ingestion, let's say. So for example, where do we find BPA? We find it in plastic water bottles. You find it in can linings. You find it in receipts. Receipts is a big one that most people don't talk about or think about. It's only starting to become a little bit more common. But so for example, if you're a woman and you work in retail, let's say, and you are handling receipts by the hundreds a day, then you might be exposed to very high levels of BPA. And not only that, we are now in a time of the world where we are doing a lot of hand sanitizing. And hand sanitizing, if you put hand sanitizer on your hands after you had a receipt, it actually can increase the level of absorption by over 100 times. So now you work in an industry where you're exposed now because of COVID, you're doing hand sanitizing and you're doing receipts, you can have very high levels of BPA. So wow. Soap and water is the best thing. I tell some of my patients who are working in retail or a place where they're handling a lot of receipts, see if you can ask for gloves. Is it okay if I wear gloves and I'm working the register so that way you don't have to? If you can't, then soap and water is the best thing to do. Can lining, so trying to reduce your can exposure. Definitely the things that give you the highest levels of BPA are anything that's with fat, anything that's liquid, tomato sauce, which is acidic. So things that are going to break that down and get it into the plastic and then you ingest it. Now, one of the really important studies that they did is they found that women who had the highest level of folate ingestion through food, not through supplement, they had less of an impact of BPA on their fertility. So when they looked at women who had very high levels of BPA, and then they saw this subset of women had the highest levels of ingestion of folate, they didn't see the same kind of negative impacts from BPA. So that's just one other thing to tell you that diet is super important. Right. And, you know, eating more of your leafy greens and vegetables, those kind of things are going to hopefully help us to, you know, I don't know exactly why, and we don't. Is it possible that we're eating natural folate and now it's not, and it's like a methylated folate as opposed to being a synthetic folic acid? Number one. Number two, is it possible that maybe now you have more fiber and it's allowing you maybe to excrete more of the toxins? I don't know exactly. Maybe we'll get to the bottom of that at some point, but those are all possible things.
I think a really good image that I saw when it came to BPA and plastics was a hard plastic food container, like a Tupperware type of container that had tomato sauce in it, and how then that container stains to the red, and that's literally the acid in the tomato sauce kind of burning and changing the molecular structure of the plastic, which means it's also then leaching into the tomato sauce. So most of us have seen those pictures. And so literally that plastic is then leaching into the tomato sauce. So that's not a good thing to then be ingesting.
Right. So, I mean, if you have to use, I mean, that's a great example for sure. We've all seen that orange and we can't wash out. And that's literally, like you said, the breaking down of that plastic. So if you're breaking down the plastic, it's getting into the food. And so, you know, we can't always avoid plastic, but the best thing to do is definitely never heat it.
Right.
I mean, I did so many years of that, sticking that plastic Tupperware into the microwave or putting your plastic cups in the dishwasher. Those kind of things are going to increase the heat, and then the molecular structure is not stable, and then it gets into our food. So that is something, if you're going to use plastic, just make sure that it's not a heated plastic. And then, like I said, a reduction of receipts, reduction of your canned foods. Tomato sauce, I find, is one of the hardest products to find, not in cans. There is more now in glass. it is quite a bit more costly, I have to say, when you want to get like strained tomatoes or you want to get tomato paste in a glass. So, you know, be mindful. It's hard because I know some of these things sometimes are a little bit difficult because there's more cost involved. Some of these things you might be able to find frozen. That might be a better option than in a can lining. Go ahead.
There's a question here. So Hope says, how about BPA free plastic?
Oh, great. You know what? I
Great.
totally forgot to get into that. Just that's perfect. Okay. So I get a lot of questions about BPA free plastic. And what happened is people have started to become nervous about BPA probably around 2006. We saw a lot of talk where around baby bottles. So baby bottles were like, hey, we find that this is bad for this is toxic, but we don't want that in our baby bottles. So they got a lot of pressure to change, and they changed BPA. This took BPA out of baby bottles, and was more by the pressure of the consumer, not necessarily that they were really concerned about our health. And so they do find the chemical companies have found the alternative. So BPF, BPS, those are sister cousins of BPA. They're basically the same chemical structure, but there's no data. Well, now there is, but there's less data about it. So it's considered safer, but truly not safer, because the new studies that we're seeing, they have a similar impact. There's just not the vast amount of data like we have for BPA to say that it's negative. So I usually tell patients, try to stay away from plastic, BPA free plastic if you can. Again, none of us is striving for perfection. That is not the goal here. The goal is to try to reduce, because we know that it's really the women who are at the highest quartile of BPA exposure that had the most impact on fertility. So stainless steel, glass when possible. The thing about plastic water bottles, because it's not heated, but often it is heated. You have water that's transported that might be sitting for a very long time in plastic water bottles in heated environments, and that will bring more BPA into the bottle. So in short, it's best not to get BPA free if you can help it. And now this doesn't mean that you can't use, what are you going to do with all your plastic things? Use it for things you're not going to eat, right? So you want to use it for something you have in your homes, little parts or pieces, that's fine. That I just wouldn't use it for things you're going to ingest.
Yeah, that's a great question. I know we're still striving to figure out what we're going to do for our water bottles, like when we go cycling, which our BPA free bottles are what we use, because they fit in the containers. But
maybe that's a company.
Yeah, right.
That's a product waiting to be discovered.
That's right. That's totally on my husband. I'll let him do that. He's the inventor. Okay, well, great question. So then the other chemical that you mentioned was phthalates.
Correct.
So talk to us about
phthalates. Phthalates are chemicals that are types of plasticizers. We think about it. We find it in plastic toys, shower curtains, vinyl flooring. You will also find it in beauty products, definitely things like nail polish. It allows that long finish for nail polish, because if you go to an alternative that doesn't have phthalates, those things tend to come off right away. So you know when you go to a nail polish that is more water-based, then it's going to be chipping right away. So phthalates are things that can impact definitely sperm health, because it increases the oxidative stress of the sperm and damage, DNA damage that way. And it can affect, same thing with egg quality and embryo quality. One of the other things that's super interesting and very sad is that we've seen that phthalates can cause, it's linked to male genitalia abnormalities. So we saw that women had the highest exposure in pregnancy to phthalates, had higher rates of things like hypospadias, which is an abnormal placement of the urethral opening on the penis, or things like problems with the testicles. So we did see that. There's also changes in the way between the the genitalia and the anus. Actually, that was one of the big things. There's the changes in the sizes. Also potential ties to later in life cancer because it reduces testosterone levels. So there's a possible impact there. So phthalates is something that we find, as I mentioned before, in toys and vinyl flooring and shower curtains. One of the main ways, two main things, beauty products, I would say, is a thing really to work on. And then the other thing is food. It comes mostly from food, so packaging. So outside food, especially fast foods, things like that, they use plastic containers that may contain phthalates. A lot of the wrappings, a lot of the outside food, to be honest, will have phthalates, BPA, even PFAS or perfluorinated chemicals like the Teflon that's in your pans. You find that in outside wrapping because they're trying to prevent that, keep water and grease from soaking it. So it stays, it keeps its shape, right?
Okay.
So with phthalates, one of my favorite resources is EWG.org and Environmental Working Group. Working Group has done a lot of work in terms of giving information out. I send all my patients there because it's just a wealth of information. And you go there, they have many different lists for beauty products and cleaning products. So one of the things I think about when I think about phthalates are fragrances. So fragrances, and I used to be in love with fragrance, love to wear perfume, have all the sprays for the home. People like that because scents give us this, we have memories of scents, right? I don't know if you remember, it was like a big deal to have a certain scent for your wedding, right? And have this idea of like a smell that would remind you of something, right? Or when your mom used to do the laundry. If you have a memory of your mom or your grandma doing the laundry, that is all part of marketing from the company. So companies often, we know a lot of times what's the smell of Lysol, what's the smell of Pine Sol, what's the smell of Tide, because companies have created this attachment with their product and a certain fragrance. We think often that fragrance equals clean. It doesn't have anything to do with clean, but when you get laundry when you're first changing and you're getting rid of fragrance, often when there's no smell, you're like, is this clean?
Right, right.
I don't know if this is clean. We've been basically trained to believe that having a good smell means clean.
Right.
So EWG can give you a lot of information on reducing. Look for their cleaning. They have a list for cleaning supplies and also for personal care products. And so you can go on there and see what your rating is. And you'd be surprised what the rating of your product is. I've had many patients that say, oh, but I use X products. I don't want to say anything about any products, but I use this product, but it's natural. There is so much marketing about trying to make things look natural. Oh, pure, natural, 100% clean. Even if it says fragrance free, oftentimes they still use chemicals in the products to help, so one of the things that phthalates is why phthalates are in fragrances. Remember, it's a plasticizer. It extends the length of a fragrance. I don't know if you've ever used a product that has an essential oil and you feel like it doesn't last long, right?
Right.
You put like say a natural perfume spray. You put it on your body. It's there for like a few minutes, and then you're like, this isn't like regular fragrance because they use chemicals to keep them on the body for a long time. Often, sometimes you wash your clothing and it's still on there after you've used perfume, right?
Well, right. I mean, even getting like secondhand clothing or things like that, if the other people use product,
correct,
into the fibers.
Correct. And you can't seem to get it out. I mean, there are certain things that you can use to try to soak it and leave it, but it takes forever.
Right. It does. Yeah. Yeah.
So
So,
go ahead.
yeah.
So with cleaning supplies, you know, it doesn't mean you have to get expensive. There are lots of things you can do with baking soda and vinegar. Again, we think we have to use specialized chemicals. One of my favorite things, like Branch Basics, has great products, and Force of Nature. So if you're used to that kind of bleach cleaning, Force of Nature is really good, and that is a very clean product. And actually, it's been, they say that it's approved for cleaning for COVID.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. I can't
Mhm.
wait to on this website because I wish that they had a website like this 8 years ago because I just,
EWG has been around for a while, but it's such a wonderful place. The other one that's really good is madesafe.org. So they do the work for you. One of the hardest things is like, oh my gosh, I'm going to go to the store now. What product, what do I use, right? How do I know? This one, like I just said, if it says natural, doesn't mean that it's natural necessarily.
right.
So EWG will go through ingredient by ingredient and tell you what the potential problems are. Is it a reproductive toxin? Things like that. So I definitely recommend that. There is also an app called Think Dirty that you can use that will look at your products. You could scan with it. So definitely that's another one that can be really beneficial.
Cool. Before we move on, there's a question about, are essential oils safe?
Okay, so that's a really great question. Just because something is natural or from the earth doesn't necessarily mean it's safe, right? We know a lot of our pharmaceuticals and a lot of our illegal drugs are natural, right? And so we have to be careful, essential oils, especially because they're very concentrated. They're very, you know, it takes so many plants to make this one little small vial of essential oils. And also, how was that plant treated? Is it organic? And what, there's a lot that goes into where it came from. Is it truly organic? Definitely, if you are trying to get pregnant with an essential oils, less is more. Dilute, 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 because there's not a lot of data when it comes to essential oils in pregnancy. If you have children in the home and you're diffusing oils, some of those things can be problematic for children. So really make sure you're diluting quite a bit. And the other certain essential oils that can be helpful, like lavender for relaxation. There's a lot of data around that, but just make sure that you are not putting the oils directly. I definitely wouldn't ingest them. I know there are people that do that. I'm not a big fan of that because there's just no real scientific data to support that.
Yeah. Yeah. Good question about the
Mhm.
oils. So then what is the third, can you remind us of the third chemical
So
that,
the third chemical biggie, I would say, are pesticides. So pesticides really came into use around the 50s. Again, after World War II, we started spraying our crops. We taught farmers that you should spray this to get rid of pests, and it's going to help to up the yield. And they even spray them on finished crops. So things like wheat and oats, they spray it on the finished product to help to dry it and prevent mold. And that means, you know, they think, well, we're only ingesting a little bit. It can't be that bad, right? But there are a lot of potential impacts. Definitely fertility. Thyroid is a huge place that we're going to see impact from all of these chemicals I discussed, and I didn't mention that earlier. And the other thing is the gut microbiome. So hugely damaged by pesticides. And, and not to mention that the pesticides are also affecting the soil. So it impacts the nutrient density of the food.
right?
So we know that there are some studies that show that organic produce has higher levels of nutrients and antioxidants, which antioxidants are really potentially beneficial for fertility.
Right.
So organic, we saw that there were studies that looked at women who had the highest levels of pesticides and men in their urine. It impacted pregnancy rates, and it can affect sperm and egg quality. And so I really tell patients, try to reduce your exposure to conventional produce if you can, and
Right.
chemical doing if you can't. Maybe you can't afford to buy organic 100%. We all can't do 100% because why? We eat out. And when we eat out, almost never are they doing organic. There are some restaurants that do, but it's very rare. And so trying to eat from, again, the list that come from EWG, Dirty Dozen and Clean 15, they put that out every year. Every year, they're going to give you a new list of where we see the highest levels of pesticides. And that's going to help to guide us. So things like onions or avocados, we can be safe to buy them on conventional because they're on the Clean 15, meaning they have the lower levels of pesticides. And things like kale or strawberries, we want to pick those up organic if possible because they're going to have the higher levels of pesticides. And so sometimes that can get expensive. So some of the things you can do to help reduce your cost is buy frozen. So frozen often can be cheaper, especially if you buy frozen in bulk from places like Sam's Club or Costco, then that's going to help you to get around that. And sometimes you could go to farmers markets where some farmers may not have the label organic, but they're using organic practices. So that definitely can be an option too. So that is another area that it's also important for meat. If you're eating meat, think that meat they give a lot of hormones, and then they eat produce that's treated with pesticides, and soy or wheat that may have pesticides or they're genetically modified. So that can affect the meat. One of the things also I think that's super important that I didn't talk about with some of the chemicals is that sometimes women will say, well, I'm not really trying to get pregnant right now, so I don't really need to worry about it. These things also impact hormones, period, for men and women. And so they will impact the rates they're linked to endometriosis, PCOS, and fibroids, and definitely thyroid disorders. And so it's possible, not to say that using like examples like phthalates, we saw women who had the highest levels of phthalates, they had a twofold increase in endometriosis risk. So not to say, again, just because there's a correlation doesn't equal causation, but there's definitely potential that it's involved.
Right. Yeah, I think it's definitely you don't want the scarcity or the scared mindset around, well, we can't have any of this, and completely change everything,
That's a
especially
great point.
are a factor, which for a lot of us they are. We can't just go completely organic and everything, switch everything out automatically. I think you touched upon, women and men who, think, well, I'm not trying to get pregnant now, but you also need to consider that these chemicals that may have potential harm to you as well as generationally, they can get stored in our bodies. And want to also consider that, if we want to think of generations down the line and their health, like Shala said, there's been studies showing that there are certain chemicals that impact not just the first generation, but fourth generation in mice. And they've seen that in humans as well, that, if we don't want that to happen, or we want to kind of almost stop that from happening for future generations, like we can have control over that in terms of our choices around what we use, how we use it, and like our consumerism as well, but also getting out that excess chemical burden on our bodies out of our bodies. So
yeah, that's a great point, because I think, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was going to ask you a question, so go ahead.
One of the things that's super important, because again, we're going back to the overwhelm. You're going to learn all this and it's going to feel like heavy and overwhelmed. So one of the things that's really important to know is that most of these chemicals, the reason why 95% to about 95 to 98% of the American population has high levels of BPA. One of the reasons for that is because of this chronic exposure, daily, 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 daily.
Right.
So they've done studies on phthalates with beauty products and BPA. If you slow down that exposure, if you reduce that exposure, the levels drop in days. So it's something that you can fix quickly. So it doesn't mean you're doomed. It doesn't mean like, oh my gosh, I can't believe. Listen, we've all eaten. I've done all of those things. My whole life was eating, you know, with plastic and warming up in containers and eating with cans and using regular beauty products. But you can always change. Now that you're learning, you can always make changes.
Right. Absolutely. And they've even done studies with pesticides as well and showed that women who changed just even to an 80% organic diet, their levels of pesticides dropped significantly in just 7 days.
Correct.
Yeah, so it is amazing how just small changes can make huge impacts. And I think that really that kind of that overwhelm, it's more about just being conscious of your choices and being conscious of your consumerism, because a lot of it comes from our purchases
Mm-hmm.
and how we use those. So
Yeah, the other thing is in terms of swapping, which is really important,
yeah.
is when you swap, think of the things that are have the most impact. So when I think of beauty products, for example, what's going all over your body? Lotion, body wash, that kind of stuff, as opposed to I need to get a new mascara. You probably are okay with keeping that mascara until you're ready to change it, and just change that lotion first. Number one thing, change the lotion, that body wash, especially lotion, because it's sitting on your skin and you know you're not washing it off. So that would be my top thing, is start with those kind of products. Start with, when you're out of a product, getting a new one, rather than I'm going to throw everything away and buy, you know, $1,000 of all new stuff in my home. It's not realistic.
Right, right. Only a few of us could maybe do that. So we have some questions here.
Sure.
Do you have any recommendations for things like lawn care products?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to pause there with that question, then we'll get to your next one,
So
Felicia.
lawn care products in terms of meaning like pesticides, like we want to, I'm not sure if that's what she means, but definitely you, I mean, I'm not great when it comes to gardening. I'm probably, but I'm sure that there are a lot of potential alternatives. I would look at if maybe EWG or Made Safe has any potential options, because there are a lot of organic farms that are doing wonderful jobs without using pesticides. And when you spray things on your lawn, especially if you're the person spraying it,
Yeah.
you're going to be really exposed. And I will tell you a story about a patient I had who came in with a history of multiple pregnancy losses. I started asking questions, and the husband worked for a pesticide company. So I said, tell me a little bit about what does your protection look like? What is the protocol? So he said, yeah, I have protective gear, I have a uniform, I have all that. I said, what happens to the uniform after you finish work? Where does that uniform go? He said, well, I wear it home. I said, well, do you take it to the wash right away? No. So imagine he comes to the home with a uniform that he's been spraying all day long, right? Is that linked potentially to the possibility that his wife has thyroid dysfunction and she's had multiple pregnancy losses? Maybe. And I told him, no, immediately before you walk into the home, it needs to be taken off in a garage or something. It should go directly into the wash, because that kind of, we don't think about that. We think, oh, it's only when you're actually spraying, but things settle on your clothes. Just as you walk to you're the person taking care of your lawn, You walk on your lawn with your shoes. You come in now the home and track that in the home. Or you went to a golf course where they had just been spraying and you bring your shoes into the home. So taking shoes off is super important. You were working with chemicals. You couldn't avoid it. Changing those clothes and not bringing that into the home, because those things will stay in the home for weeks.
Okay. So
Mm-hmm.
she clarified a little bit. So she says, I have mine treated because it gets hot and it dies in the summer here in New England.
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know what the treatment is, but I mean, I guess it sounds like maybe before you, like if you're out there, just to then
Mm-hmm. I
change.
would make sure, yeah, you're probably wearing some type of protective gloves, maybe even a mask. Clothes and shoes should be taken off and not go into the home or directly into the wash right away, because definitely there's potential for exposure. And even if you're not trying to get pregnant, as I said before, there are definitely a lot of impacts that can happen to our thyroid and can lead to autoimmune thyroid conditions.
And I think that you also may just want to chat with whatever company you're using. I
That's
believe there are some companies, like if you're in our area, in the Seacoast area, I believe there are some companies who try to use more natural approaches. So that may be worth looking into as well. So if you have someone treat it, if you're not doing the treating.
correct.
Um,
That's definitely a great thing. You should always try to call. And if the company can't give you a lot of information, that's probably a little bit of a red flag if you can't get a lot of information. But I would have to do a little bit more digging about that. So I definitely can look for that and give that information to you and you can share it. But I would look and see if there's any potential things through EWG. They have a lot of guides, and Made Safe has a lot of wonderful guides for household items.
Awesome. So she did have another question about safe
Mm-hmm.
flooring. She was going to switch from carpet to vinyl plank,
Mm-hmm.
um, but she may not do that now because of the vinyl. So um,
Oh, super
it
hard. Linoleum is a potential. I mean, the new, I would say there is some things like hardwood, but even with hardwood, sometimes it's treated.
right.
There are certain natural oils. Sometimes you'll find a company that uses hardwood and their natural oils that they do finish with. So it's not, it's tough. I mean, we all live in homes with paints with volatile organic compounds and furnitures that have flame retardants and things like that. Um, Definitely it depends on if the person's in a vulnerable state at this point, trying to get pregnant, um, menopausal women and teenagers or children that are growing. There's a lot of potential areas, and so definitely I wouldn't do a lot of switching in your home when you're pregnant, or going to be trying to get pregnant, because a lot of times we do that. We do all this fixing of our homes, and that's the most vulnerable period that we have. And so I would say try to, if unless you can be out of the home, if you're somebody that can be out of the home, sometimes if we buy things and we leave them out in the sun, it will help to off gas the product before we put it in the home. So it will help, because that smell when you open a new piece of furniture or something like that, that can help. Um, in terms of flooring, I would look at, see if there's any ideas on Made Safe. That's a potential for options for homes. And there are some other things I probably could get you some resources for that. I don't have them off the top of my head where to look for that, but it's wonderful question though.
It is. Yeah. I mean, I totally get it. I mean, we've gutted portions of our house and tried to make choices around all of that. And it's tough, especially when it's a larger purchase like that, to
Mm,
think, okay, what am I
right.
gonna get that's safe for me, safe for the environment, within my budget?
Mhm. Sometimes
Um,
they're a lot more expensive, the more
right.
natural options. Yeah.
Yeah, so I would definitely check out that some of those websites that Shala suggested to look into. So then we have another question about what is a good body lotion that's affordable?
So I would again go to EWG, look for a rating of 1 or 2, And they also have part of their website that's called EWG Verified. So EWG Verified means it's kind of this, they've done a lot of rigorous things to look and see what's the safest out there. I know Babo Botanicals, it's more of a children's brand, but they have an adult line too. And they have a lot of EWG verified products and they don't break the bank. They have a lot of sales. I know that there's a lot of other products that we can look at that are a little more expensive, but for more affordable, I like Babo. I think you can get a larger lotion probably for like $12 or something. Whole Foods might have, or Sprouts can have a lot of good options, like every day they look on EWG and see what's in your area. That's the best thing I would say. Go on EWG. When I used to shop, I write down kind of what, or take a picture, a screenshot of what are in the top, and then go and see what do you have at Sprouts, because some of them aren't going to be available unless you order them directly. But if you're not the person that wants to order and you want to go buy what's available to you at Sprouts or Whole Foods or wherever Ralph's you're shopping, then look at EWG and see. Made Safe, again, both wonderful options to give you the best, the safest options, because now there's so many options. Before, when I started, it was like zero.
Yeah.
Now it's like, it's the fastest growing portion of the beauty industry.
Yeah. Yeah. So here's another question. How about clothing materials? Polyester versus cotton,
Yeah.
all of the clothing
I mean, if
options.
you want to be the safest, cotton is probably the safest. And then we can get into whether it should be organic or not organic. But the problem with that is we get into cost, right? It becomes really difficult. If you can afford it, yes, organic cotton is probably the best thing over things like rayon or polyester. But again, it might be costly. But I would try to go for probably organic cotton. Same thing for sheets. A lot of the sheets and a lot of the clothing, to be honest, is pre-treated with things like PFAS. So they don't wrinkle. Anything that's anti-wrinkle, or that definitely is something that may have perfluorinated chemicals on it. And so we hate ironing, but unfortunately it's not as safe.
Right. I think another thing that to think about with the clothing is where you like what body part are you wearing it on and how long are you wearing it? So when I think about it, because it can get totally overwhelming, and I remember at the very beginning of all of this, I was like, I am switching my whole entire wardrobe, and then I was like, oh no, I can't afford that.
Yeah. It's not realistic. I mean, you're right. Maybe where you're using your undergarments, your underwear, your bras, then
exactly. It's the undergarments, the undershirts, pajamas even, start with things that are actually touching your skin, to start to switch those out. Sheets is another great idea. And then if you want to go bigger, then you can consider, then actually swapping more things out to what would be more considered natural, non-chemical, like wool does not need to be treated.
right.
Linen doesn't necessarily need to be treated, but it wrinkles a lot. So if you don't want to deal with that, but there are becoming more companies still, just like beauty products. There are more companies now who are providing a wider array of organic cotton products, as well as recycled polyester products, which I'm not sure chemically wise how that would impact with the processing that may need to happen with that. But there are definitely more companies out there that may be on Made Safe. I've not been on that website,
Made
so I'm not.
Safe does have some things that are clothing items. Especially it's important when people do things like certain sports. A lot of the sporting gear, ski wear, certain jackets, they're made with a lot of those PFAS chemicals. So they may have options for that, and certain companies that have been instrumental in getting safer items. But again, most of those come with a price tag.
They do.
Mm.
And for adults, if you're considering that, okay, this is an investment, that you're switching over, especially if it is something that you're going to be wearing frequently, then you can certainly, consider as an investment,
Yeah.
that what's going to last you. Let's see if there are any more questions. I gotta scroll down. I prefer organic cotton. I don't mind about wrinkly looks. I want some safe for my kids. Yeah, absolutely. That's um in the very beginning, I know for myself, I'm not sure with Shala, but most of my kids' clothing were organic cotton
Yeah.
or wool.
Mm-hmm.
And um as they've gotten older, it is there's still many more products
It's
out there
harder.
and than there used to be. And if you look at the European Union and European countries have more regulations on these things.
Mhm.
So if you go to more European style websites, which again, they're becoming much more widely available, you will find more options there as well. And the prices actually aren't astronomical. Um, if you're thinking of it as more of like an investment, their pajamas, like,
Mhm.
their underwear, things that are going to be on their skin more. And kids don't need a lot of clothes. The
Contrary to
other,
our belief, right?
right, right. The other thing to think about with clothes and kids is you just hand-me-downs. Once they've been washed a lot in non-chemical products,
Hmm.
um, it is fairly safe for them to wear regular cotton
Hmm.
um, too. So that's also something to consider for that.
Yes. I mean, again, we do what we can. We start
Right.
getting into them. We start going in because, I mean, at some age,
It's
or,
global.
they get older, they want to pick their own clothes. They see kids at
Totally.
school eating certain things. It gets
Right.
quite difficult as they get older to control everything. So you do what you can.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's, I think that sometimes if you just kind of go, okay, what can I actually wrap my head around to swap, to reduce, and just
Mhm.
start with maybe one or two things and feel really comfortable with that. And then maybe pick another two things
Mhm.
in or two.
Like
It's
juggling, right? You didn't start juggling with 5 balls. You started with two, see if you could do it,
yeah,
add one in, and you
right.
keep going until you can do more.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I'm still dealing with it.
Same,
It's
same, same,
not,
same. I mean,
it's
when you start going into, oh my gosh, I need to change pillows and mattresses, and you start,
right.
it's very hard. So you do
It is.
what you can. You need to switch your mattress. Okay, I'm going to think about now I need to do an investment to get a safer mattress, but it's not often realistic to be, I'm going to change 3 mattresses in my home. It's a very pricey item.
It is.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So one thing at a time, because it can get extremely overwhelming. Um, I have a question for Shala. Do
Mhm.
you have any suggestions around actually not just swapping out products or what we are being exposed to, but then how can we support how our body processes and
Mhm.
alleviate those things from our bodies?
Yeah. So I think that comes with a few things, making sure that you are well hydrated. Okay. So you are somebody who is your how are you excreting toxins is going to be through urination, having proper bowel movements, sweating. And so are you somebody who gets out and exercises regularly and sweats? Are you using, maybe you're not going to use sauna, but you can do exercise. So sweating, making sure you have regular bowel movements, that's normal. So if you are somebody who's more constipated, and I can't tell you how many patients I see who have difficulty with bowel movements, that means that you need to do something with your diet, most likely. I mean, it may have something to do with exposure if you have some gut damage,
Mhm.
but definitely trying to stay away from less processed, I mean, reduce processed foods, reduce sugars, anything like that. And remember, we talked a little bit about um, the chemical exposure not having as much impact if you had high folate. So again, I think that eating a high plant-based diet. I'm not a vegetarian or a vegan, and I'm not against that. If you are, I think it's great because there's also not super healthy ways to be a vegan, but eating higher levels of vegetables or fruits I think is going to be best, so we have a lot of fiber. So
Mhm.
increasing our fiber is going to be helpful to try to excrete, and making sure you're taking care of liver function and things like that, which a lot of it comes with all the things we talked about. I think that all those things are good.
Yeah, and to piggyback off that, for my specialty around exercise, but also just the health around your pelvis. I mean, so exercise obviously great for gut health, your microbiome, for sweating, getting those toxins out. Exercise helps with actually gut motility as well. But it also exercising in a conscious way. So doing it so that you're more aware of what's happening in your pelvic floor. You're more aware of what's happening in your core, because those are two areas, especially preconception, pregnancy, postpartum, that are really important for our bodies to function properly and efficiently. And if you're constipated and you have a really tight pelvic floor, or vice versa,
Mm-hmm.
um, they work against each other.
Yeah.
So it's also it's diet, which is really important, but it's also thinking what's happening with my muscles. Do I have a really weak core? And so now there is no support to your intestines for the motility of your stool, which actually needs that support, and not a tight core, but a strong, healthy core to support that motility and support that actual peristalsis to get the poop out, and the ability of your pelvic floor to relax to allow the poop to come out as well.
Yes.
So,
And
yeah,
stress goes in there too, right? So
right.
if you're dealing with a lot of stress, then that sometimes can be linked to having issues with gut motility.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Well, stress and with our gut nervous system, and stress and clenching in through here, which this is a sister joint to our hips and our pelvis. So if we clench here, we may be
Yeah.
clenching our pelvis. So there's a lot to be thinking about in terms of processing and getting things out. But exercise is a great way to piggyback off of the diet piece as well. They work hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
For sure.
we have another question. So where to go? Any tips on getting grandparents to consciously buy things?
Mm-hmm.
That's
Hard. I mean, I give you kudos if you get the people in your family to do it, because
yeah.
sometimes that's hard, even just convincing your partner to do it. Grandparents is tough. Do you mean if you're getting your kids to go over, or you're going to be in their home, that you may want to? Something that I do is I bring things. So if I'm going to go somewhere and eat and I'm not sure, I will just, not that you aren't going to eat their food, because I don't think that's realistic, but you make sure that the item you bring is something that is going to be supportive of what you want to eat, and it's going to be organic. If you're talking about chemicals, so if you have children or you're going to be bathing at their home, then you might want to bring them the products or talk to them a little bit about safety. I think it's really hard, because definitely there's a barrier to, well, this is what I used my whole life and I'm fine. One of the most wonderful examples that I think for people to have an understanding about chemicals and what they can do is Johnson & Johnson's baby powder. Something as seemingly harmless as Johnson & Johnson's baby powder has now been linked to so many cases of ovarian cancer, and they still sell it. But the talcum powder, it's so dangerous. A lot of people don't even know. There's still people that don't know, because they've done a wonderful job of trying to smooth things over and everybody thinks it's safe. Um, the other thing you could potentially do is show them there are certain great movies.
Mm,
Overload.
I have a little visitor.
Overload is great. Try to find it. I just heard recently, unfortunately, they removed it from Amazon. But I would look at Overload. And there's another one called Toxic Beauty. And when you watch those things, for people that don't have an understanding, they hear the studies and the scientists talking about it. And the women that were involved, for example, in the Johnsons, the women that had the cancer, that I thought was I thought that that was really a wonderful illustration for those who really don't know about it.
Mm.
But it is quite tough. I think little by little, trying to push something on somebody can be quite difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I know for my situation and the two sets of grandparents, it's been slow and they'll forget. But just allowing them time to also process it, and if you can offer suggestions as to what you would prefer or provide it for them, like Shala said, or if it's a gift, again, pointing them in the direction so that they don't have to do much of the research themselves, is
Gift
also very,
is hard, I find, because you
yeah.
want to insult the person who did it. I get a number of gifts from patients sometimes, or things like that, that are lotions that I wouldn't use, or even staff. And sometimes I don't say anything because I feel that I don't want to make the person feel bad. They went out of their way to get me, and it was such a nice gesture. So, I mean, it's different when it's family. Like you said, you may be able to give them a list. Hey, these are the things that we like. These are the companies that we like to use or like to shop for. We're really concerned. I think that for grandparents, a lot of the change is very different now. Now is very different. There's way more chemicals in the environment than there were, and there's way more treatment of our food and way more processing. People didn't eat out 5 times a week when our grandparents, they ate at home like 100% of the time. So, and a lot of them did their own everything. So it's a very different world.
Yeah, yeah. And I also think that if you do receive something from a grandparent, um, it doesn't necessarily have to be out all the time either. You know, if it was a toy or clothing or something that maybe doesn't align with your choices, you could potentially put it aside, only bring it out when they're there. You know, there are many different ways to get around, but it's again, it's not, if it's not an everyday exposure of something that you definitely know that is significantly harmful to you, it's less concerning.
Yeah, correct. We don't want to give our children this idea of this anxious behavior of you can't do this, you can't do that. I mean, I know there's a lot of people that have quite a lot of restrictions on their family and their children. I mean, I try to educate my children on certain things, but I also don't want them made to feel anxious or scared about things when they're out at school or things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's see if does anyone else have any other questions before we wrap up? We've had some really good questions. See, and I guess when we're waiting for questions, Shella, do you have
Mhm.
anything that you would like to share?
So, yeah, as I said before, I think the greatest takeaway is really just as we talked about, little by little, taking little bites on, exploring EWG or Made Safe. And they have so many articles on there to give you education. So just a little bit at a time. Don't get overwhelmed. That's going to make you just forget it. Never mind. I'm not going to do it. I can't. We're just reducing it. That's it. We're not going to eliminate it. I still have regular furniture. I still have mattresses in my home that are totally normal. Um, Vacuum is my number one thing. Vacuum, 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 and use
Yeah,
wet mop because you want to get rid of dust. So dust is one of the things that's going to give us higher exposure to certain chemicals because everything produces dust.
right,
It's
right.
the best thing you can do.
Yeah. And so for those who are still with us and for those who sign up for the replays of these, which you can do in my profile, um, I'm also going to be doing a workshop next week, which I'm just announcing today, really, that is going to dive more into kind of the detox process if you want to explore that more and ways to support that. So it is going to get into more of the reduction, but also then other ways to support your natural detox process, which is a long-term thing, but is it can be a really good thing for your health. So I'll post more about that this week, and if you get the replays, there will also be links in the email for that as well. So awesome.
Well, thank
Okay,
you so much. This was a
thank you. This was a fantastic conversation, and I'm so excited that you joined me.
thank
And
you so much.
yeah,
Really enjoyed
watching you.
it.
So thanks
So
everyone for
we'll
joining
talk
us.
soon. Good luck with everything. Thank you everybody for joining us today.
Bye, Shala.
Bye.